Okay. Welcome to today's Standards Committee meeting. Apologies for absence. Item 2, to approve the record of the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of November.
Three. Well, yes, the voting through just there. Nothing else.
Was somebody in the second one?
Yeah, I think Evelyn.
All right. Yeah. All in favour? Unanimous. Thanks. Matters arising from those minutes. Are there any? I'll review some orders and financial records. Okay, I take that as none. If we can move on to the amendment of today, item 3, the government report.
Thank you, Chair. So the report this morning comes from myself and Andrew Yendall, the Monitoring Officer. And there's 3 purposes behind the report this morning. It's to approve the annual review of governance. It's to see the results of the governance self-assessment that's been undertaken, and then also to approve the annual governance statement, which is towards the end. So in terms of the annual review of governance, 1.3 shows you 7 core principles of good governance. They go from A to G, and they include things like openness and stakeholder engagement, developing the entity's capacity, and implementing good practices in transparency. And the structure of the report goes through each of these in turn and describes the arrangement that the authority has in place for these. And then it also describes some in-year commentary in terms of any changes from the year ahead or how it's actually been implemented. So I don't anticipate going through this in detail, but you will notice in in-year commentary where there has been updates or changes, so where policies have been refreshed, or where we've had the results of reviews from external audits, or these kind of issues, they are explicitly referred to. So, and that goes through page 4, page 5, page 6 includes some of the changes to do with our commitment to reducing carbon outputs. So this element of the report ends at page 9. So that is the annual review of governance that we're obliged to do as part of our commitment within the Code of Corporate Governance. So moving on to page 10, this is the second item in the report this morning. This is the self-assessment of the Audit Committee. So this is the second year we've undertaken this, and this is a request from the external auditors that on an annual basis we do look at our. So this is the purpose. This is the annual self-assessment to be undertaken by those whose responsibility is governance, and the external auditors have said that they're happy that this be undertaken by the Standards Committee. So from 9.5 onwards, it describes certain good practice questions.
In terms of the good practice questions, Gordon,
yeah,
clearly the body charge of standards is the authority itself. Charge of this is the authority itself. Am I right in thinking that the answers to these questions were created by officers or by members?
The questions were set, but the answers were taken by officers, yes.
Do you think it's worthwhile circulating it to members to get them to give their opinion on what their answers might be? They may not be correct, but at least it would get the people charged with governance to give an opinion on their own. Yeah, absolutely.
That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, great. Of course, when you go through these reports, it gives the impression, of course, that it's a very structured and a very dry approach. And of course, we're talking about governance all the time, both within the public meetings and outside of those meetings. But this is just the structure that we're obliged to go through and to report into evidence against. So you'll see that within page 10 and further on in page 11, it talks about our own commitment to it. And importantly, within the self-assessment commentary, this actually provides some local context as well. So it does describe where there are, so the fact that we don't have a formal audit committee, for example, will be fleshed out in that situation as well. And the fact that other broader areas of concern that relate to governance, such as treasury management, do still go to the authority itself. So the one areas which does come about, has the membership of the committee been assessed against the core knowledge and skills framework? That's something that's still to be undertaken, so that'd be good to do at some point. So those,
True, it was in terms of that, this kind of assumes that there's a subcommittee, isn't there? That you can change the membership of if the skills weren't appropriate, whereas you've got an appointed or elected authority membership that you couldn't really do anything about if they have a brilliant or useless they are. So really, any assessment of that wouldn't be answering that question. It'd be answering a similar but different one, wouldn't it?
yeah, so that's why in this I try to flesh out the fact that these questions are designed for an audit committee.
Yeah.
But of course, in our local context, we don't have that, but we do have a broad range of members with a broad range of skill set who do go through some kind of competitive process in order to be on the authority.
Well, we tend to self-select, don't we? We put our names forward. Not many people, but then.
Well, in absolute truth, even in a fully elected local authority, you end up by having to appoint members of an audit committee on a party political proportional basis rather than on a skills basis. So whilst you might undertake some nominal skills exercise within a group, party group, basically you have to appoint membership according to your allegiance. And I have to say, having sat on some audit committees, clearly skills isn't necessarily the highest element of the reason for choice. But that is, I'm afraid, what the Local Government Act prescribes, isn't it? So that will trump anything else.
Or we can do best in deafness.
Yes.
And I imagine the structure that's given to us is to remind the people who structure audit committees of the broader objectives.
Chairman, if there is any particular issue that is flagged up, then there is always the opportunity to identify, skill training, requirement, because that's also a function of this committee, isn't it? Is to identify training. So if you felt there was a gap in which to, undertake some further training, then we can look to implement.
So moving on, the third element of the report this morning is the annual government statement. So members will be aware that this is the version that goes into the draft accounts. So it gets us seen by authority at a point in time. But there is some parts of this I'd like to draw to your attention. It describes the scope of responsibility. So this is part of the external accounts and audit process, if you like, the purpose of the governance framework and the system of internal control. 3.1 describes the key elements of the governance framework and the annual review of effectiveness. So, and in 4.3, I do refer to the fact that a number of changes to governance were considered at the April meeting, and LT.
Yeah, at that point, Gordon, I think it'd be interesting to get the perspective of our independent person, Mick Wrigglesford, who I believe is watching the meeting, even though he wasn't able to.
I just absolutely
about particularly paragraph 4.3 and the April potential changes to government.
You'll remember that last time we met, we had the training meeting in November 22, and the monitoring officer then, Carl Hedger, slightly ran over time with death by PowerPoint. Yeah. And I was given about 10 seconds at the end instead of the promised 15 minutes that I was going to speak for. And I had about 4 points that I wanted to bring up to you all, which I did at the time very quickly. One of which was declarations of interest, and we had a discussion about Roadford Lake, and I have no problems with declarations of interest. There didn't seem to be any problems at the April meeting. But if you remember, it had originally been suggested that I should view some meetings and actually give feedback to members on those. And Carl Hedger really decided that that wasn't quite appropriate, just spring it on you without any warning. However, you got warned in a sense at that meeting that you are now all on TV, you're being watched, and there is public perception that's important to this. So I brought up very quickly at the end of that meeting the business of paying attention at the meeting, not doing things like knitting, eating meals, don't do anything that you would do driving a car. And almost all of that April meeting, Mrs. Nicholson was on her phone playing what appeared to be something like Candy Crush or betting or something under the table while she had.
Could I just interrupt a moment? I'm sorry. This meeting is being recorded and publicly available?
Yes.
Right, okay. So I'm just checking that this is something you're
Yes.
prepared to have publicly.
I am prepared to stand by this. That she also had her laptop or tablet open on the table in front of her. So I don't wish to particularly pick on her, but that piece of behaviour, as far as the public is concerned, watching it, really shows somebody not particularly paying attention to an important meeting that was going on, or apparently so.
Sorry, could I just say, and it may be something to do with not being in the room. As we are now paperless, most members have these. I think that
Yes.
Mrs. Nicholson continues to use her county council device.
Yes.
So I'm not quite sure if you're saying having her device open in front of her, because that is what the pictures are on.
Loads of people have their devices open in front of us,
Sorry, I was just
including her, and clearly that's what it was open for. Rather than in full view of the councillor, that she's clearly doing something else entirely under the table.
And irrespective of what she was actually doing,
It doesn't matter. What she was doing, it's the public perception of that I'm concerned about. And then I also brought up the thing that I had flagged up to me that some members were being particularly robust with members of staff or with other members in the way they addressed them, perhaps not showing what we would expect as courtesy and respect. And you'll remember I brought that up, and because I had so little time at the November meeting and the standards training, I used the word snowflakes. These are not snowflakes you're dealing with, which was a deliberately inflammatory word, and I got picked up on that by Dominic Elson. We had a quick, robust discussion about that, which, I had used the word deliberately just to try and get it to stick in people's minds. Well, at that meeting in April that I watched on the governance issue, chairman and what appeared to be vice chairman, you happen to be sitting in the seat next to the chairman, are chatting away while female members are speaking, and they're looking out of the window. And people aren't necessarily paying attention to the person who's speaking. And I would expect, if you are in a meeting where you're all listening to each other and you've always had very good manners, all of you, then I would expect you to actually look at the person who's speaking and pay attention to what they're saying, not apparently ignoring them. And it only happened to some of the women in the room.
Stephen?
Well, as actually, I think when you said the vice chairman talking to the chairman, it can only have been me. And could I just say that in that instance, we were talking about the management of the meeting and whether or not that item actually was appropriate to continue. And as I believe, and there was absolutely no disrespect intended in this at all, but I think that the presenters of the item, as it happens, were the chief executive, and you weren't there, the chief executive. In trying to manage the meeting, we had, so to speak, to have that conversation during the course of it, but we do try to minimise the amount of conversation we have. Mick, as you know, because both of us try very hard not to show any disrespect to anybody because we don't have it.
You and Robin have always had lovely manners, and it just was unfortunate that a female speaker who is not quite as forthcoming or used to public speaking or whatever it is, but a little more hesitant in her delivery, was the person who was speaking at the time. And also, there is also the issue that you were talking about, which is that the whole business of authority meetings costs quite a lot of staff time and effort in preparing papers and doing things. You'd had 6 months to consider this issue. You'd had loads of PowerPoint presentations. You'd got all the information you needed to make decisions. And if you remember at the standards training, I think I also mentioned it, and if I didn't do it then, I did it afterwards, the business about kicking the can down the road and not making decisions when you have sufficient information to do it. The one that came to mind before was the CDEX, the artificial cladding, where somebody had put it up against, you know, authority rules in a sense, or authority guidance. And that decision, which was a really simple decision to make, took ages of authority time to resolve. This governance issue is clearly on a different order completely, but in the meeting, people were saying, well, perhaps we should consult the parishes. You've got parishes amongst the authority members. They're not there to represent individual parishes, but certainly Mike is there as a parish representative, aren't you? That's why you're on the authority. And you also have a parish forum in which you can discuss things like this. So you'd had 6 months to have all those discussions. So I felt it was a little bit disrespectful to, as it happened, Sarah, who was the chief executive, who was presenting this to the meeting, to essentially be told, well, you've just wasted the last 6 months. We're just going to move this on and do something that we actually have the capacity to do in the room as it stands. So all in all, I thought as an item of agenda, watching it as an independent person, as a member of the public would, as people watch things on social media these days, increasingly you are coming under scrutiny. I thought you fell down on 3 of the 4 counts that I had picked up in the standards training. And much as I don't want to fall out with all of you, I am supposed to be the independent person that is the voice of the public watching this. And, you know, I don't know what else I am supposed to do other than ask the chairman if I can bring it up at the next standards meeting and punt it back to you to decide. If you think I'm being completely unfair, that's fair enough. You are a very experienced authority. We have very few complaints, but what I'm trying to do is head off complaints for the future. And I was just disappointed in the way that the governance meeting happened. You have a financial crisis on your hands, people. You know, you need to make some strong decisions. Either you had to say in that meeting, we have to close it, all the services we give to young people, close the Pinkery Centre, fire half the rangers, or you had to decide to do something about the bits of the budget that you could influence. And essentially what happened is it appeared to get kicked down the road with some really quite odd voting going on and the way that the decisions were made. If people feel they can't concentrate for a 3-hour meeting, even though I'm prepared to sit through it and watch it on social media, as it were, then perhaps they should leave the meeting and certainly they shouldn't be voting. So that's it, Chairman. I apologise if I've upset anybody and if I've picked on anybody, but I don't mean to. I'm simply telling you what I saw.
I think that's very useful to get an independent external viewpoint of what we look like, because I know, because I watched it too on the YouTube channel, and the perspective you get is different, because what I see, because I tend to sit down to the left of the chairman, is sort of the top table there and the people in front of me. What the camera sees is the people at the far ends of the table, particularly, and in the distance, the top table.
Yes.
And so the interactions out there are almost less important than the 4 or 5 people at the ends of the table, because you can see everything they do.
Yes.
And there was more than just Francis just playing with phones and doing emails and things, or whatever it was.
Yes, I'm sorry for picking on her. She is the one that just stands out when you watch that meeting, possibly just because of the camera angle. There's no other, particular explanation for that. Sorry, Chairman.
That was no, it's fine. I just finished speaking. But thanks very much. Everybody else, anything?
It's funny you should say that, because I think we've had this discussion before. It's the perspective that people see. And you do see a lot of members not 100% concentrating on the meetings. The way they sit, very often the way they're dressed. I know we can't probably govern them, but we can't do anything about that. But it's been said to me, oh, members don't even look as if they're interested, or they're not even awake half the time. They don't seem to show an interest. And that's been said to me, and I was surprised how many people do watch it after the meeting. We've got one particular member of the public who watches all the meetings probably twice over, and he's always batting on about what he perceives as poor management, if you like. And I don't know how we're going to overcome that, but there's a chance that he might be a member in future, so perhaps we'll be able to say the same things about him if I'm still around. You never know. It's very difficult. I don't know the answer to it, but I agree with Mike entirely that it's a perception that many of the people, the general public, see of the National Guard.
Well, I can certainly confirm that you flagged this up to me before as well in the last year.
Even a second, but do you have any viewing figures for online meetings?
I don't think you can get them like that.
We can get them.
Yeah.
I don't know off the
I
top
don't
of
know
my
what
head.
Either.
Yeah, I think the two issues that jump out from what you said are sort of procrastination, which in some ways one can train people out of it. But what's the reason for the hesitation? Is it because some of our members have political affiliations, or they have concerns about their constituencies and other members don't have constituencies? You know, is that why people are sort of pulling back? Or is it just fear of the other members' views? I noticed at the beginning of this report, we were talking about whistleblowing and arrangements for reporting concerns for staff and contractors. Maybe members will be included in that too. There may be members who feel intimidated and don't feel that they can actually nudge things on. You know, the world's moved on. We are the group changes on a regular basis. But the other thing is the kind of disrespect.
Yes, it was that.
And that, you know, can you train people? We talked about it so often, haven't we? One can lead by example, but I'm not really sure how we kind of get this higher level of respect.
My understanding of that is that you have staff processes for grievances and things, and people can bring grievances to, and that's not actually under my purview at all. And that it's the Standards Committee and complaints to the Standards Committee, which you bring up things like being disrespected, and that I am the independent person that if you feel you were disrespected, you can speak to me. I can bring it up with the Standards Committee, either anonymously or by naming people. It doesn't really matter which, depending on how you felt. The Standards Committee then decides whether it's going to look at that, and then it checks back with me as the independent person to check that all the proper processes have been gone through. When I was on the Standards Committee for Torridge District Council, the complaints that were made used to come in at the rate of about 2 to 3 a month. And we had entire Standards Committees investigations at enormous costs. You may remember, way back for those with long memory, it made the national news that Bedford Town Council had an argument about a councillor who was an atheist who didn't want to come into the meetings for prayers at the start, yes? Well, that prompted a whole series of complaints. So we had, you know, Stephen complaining about Mike complaining about, you know, and it went just all round with hundreds of complaints about each other, purely on political grounds. It divided down party lines. One of the things I've really liked about Exmoor is that I don't actually know the political affiliation of most of you, and it's never seemed to be an issue in the meetings, and it shouldn't, should it, as I've understood it. You know, it's certainly in planning and certainly in standards, and in the main meetings, it's supposed to be apolitical. And I try and stay as apolitical as I can in all of this. You know, in my working life, I work for both Conservative and Labour governments and the European Commission. So, you know, I'm both a Brexiteer and a non-Brexiteer. I was making money out of either. It doesn't really matter.
No, all I was going to say is you've got a very difficult job because respect nowadays, even in the outside world, it's gone. Respect for people, property, everything, but especially for people. When I chair the meeting, one of the things I feel so disrespectful for is when you make an announcement at the start of the meeting that you make sure that all your mobile devices, telephones are turned off. We virtually never had a meeting up there that somebody's phone don't go off. Mm-hmm. Well, to me, that is appalling. I don't even carry one.
Yes.
I come to a meeting, I don't carry it. It's either left in the car or I don't even bring it for the simple reason that life don't depend on that machine. When I come here, I'd like to think that when anybody comes to a meeting, they're focused on that meeting.
Yes.
Nothing else matters.
Are there any training issues arising out of this?
But how do you train it? To be quite honest, you ask them to make sure all your phones are turned
No, I
off.
don't mean necessarily about phones. I mean, you know, generally about the discussion that's been taking part about this paragraph.
Can I just ask, in terms of the chairs of the meeting, is there any sort of training that we could think about?
I know there certainly is training for chairing.
Yeah.
There's also training in decision making, and I know that sounds very basic, but we seem to have real problems in reaching conclusions to decisions at times. And, you know, maybe a decision making workshop might not be a bad thing.
That'd be interesting. Great, and you know, decision making committee.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, because there'll be changes of chairs at the next meeting, there might well be need for chairing training anyway.
There is a cost to prevarication. There is a cost to not making decisions. And, you know, that kind of needs to come into any training. If you make a decision, an instant decision, probably 80% of cases, it's going to be correct. And then you might have to undo a couple of decisions. But, you know, there is an economic, we should look at that.
Is that it?
Can I go back to just?
After those 4 lines.
Yeah, so section 4 details how we've reviewed effectiveness over the course of last year, and then section 5 introduces the significant governance issues, and in particular the bullet points in 5.2 are quite useful to highlight because this is a forward-looking element of the report, and that includes certain things as the model of decision making for farming in protected landscape, the introduction of a new financial ledger, how the decision making in the local community network for Somerset Council and how that's all going to work. I will implement a new anti-money laundering policy, and also, of course, the development of the new national park and partnership plan. So these are the upcoming issues over the next financial year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any comments? Others?
This one, in the section 1, review, I wonder when we get to page 3, which is about partnerships underpinned by a common vision that's understood and agreed by all partners. I'm just interested how we actually achieve that, and do we have like common guidelines? I don't need an answer today. And at the bottom of that page, in our in-year commentary, extensive consultation arrangements are in place, but we heard from the chairman of our parish consultative committee at the last review that it's getting really hard to get people to come to those meetings or to attend. So really were extensive consultation arrangements in place? Because we need to almost be looking as we go forward at a different method of engaging our parish and other organisations together, because we don't think that forum's working.
No, respond just on that, and no, it's just to say in terms of the partnerships and the vision, if I understand your question right, I think that's probably in relation to the partnership plan and our partnership groups, obviously. So what we do, and we use the plan as the framework for our own corporate planning. That's I guess how that all works. And I think you're right in terms of the parish consultative forum. There have been various discussions about that. And we're having a look again as part of the partnership plan review in terms of, can we be more effective? Can we use some of the other, the new groupings in Somerset, for example, and possibly maybe holding more of a sort of a conference or, an event rather than having those, kind of individual meetings, because I think we do find that, the agendas, it's for the parishes, and we're there for them to raise the issues that they want to. And that's not really, I think when things are
was wrong.
Exactly. I think when something is a problem, it does come up. Yeah, but it might be more of an opportunity to share the work that we're doing and, that partners are doing on an annual basis, possibly as an alternative. But that's, that's the discussion.
And I think as we're reviewing the year, we can't say it's been expensive, because it's been a hassle to get people to come to our meetings. What do you think, Mark?
Well, I personally really think there is a benefit in having the parish, obviously. I declare an interest to begin with, being chair of it at the present. I personally feel that we have also have a duty to consult with the people of Exmoor and the parishes, and that was a good way of doing it, or is a good way of doing it. Not what was, it is a good way of doing it. I don't think the other groupings that we're talking about will fulfill that purpose. The other groupings are split, for example, between Somerset and Devon. So the LCNs will cover, the setup for Somerset will not cover the Devon side. I think we have lost our way a little bit in setting the agendas for the parish consultative forum meetings. It only needs one specific item to really generate interest. As we saw when we were at TV there, the hall wasn't big enough to cope with the people that were there. And if there are interesting things on the agenda which appeal to the people of Exmoor, they will come. But very difficult to find time for everybody to come to every meeting, and I think this is what we're up against. But I would hate to see it disappear, but I would like to see certain changes. I thought personally moving it around the parishes of Exmoor, the areas of Exmoor, may have helped to resolve the travelling involved in everybody doing it. We've got to remember at the end of the day that times are hard out there, and to get people from Paracombe to travel to Cuckombe, or from Cuckombe to travel to Paracombe, or Exmoor is a lot of travelling around, and none of these people are paid to do these things. They don't get a mileage allowance, albeit frugal that we get. It does go towards the cost of doing it. And I think this is something that we're going to have to look at across the board.
I mean, Mike, I know that there's a review of the parish consultant before, slated to happen.
Yes.
To make it more effective. I mean, one of the things I've noticed, looking at the minutes, is that half or more of the people that attend it are authority members or officers. Whereas the amount of consultation with the external bodies is automatically cut in half. Unless you say there's the occasional really big ticket item like TV.
Can I talk very briefly come back as well? Yeah, when we do talk about stakeholder engagement as well, it isn't just with regards to the parish consultative forum. It's also the the business surveys that are undertaken, the questionnaires that we do. And if you go onto our website at the minute, one of the first items you see is the consultation on the new partnership plan as well. So it's I'm thinking of it as broadly as possible.
Yes.
Can you put banning lead shot as an owner of 2 shotguns? Let's forward. Voluntary ban on lead shot.
Any more? If not, I've got 3 recommendations. One, to approve the annual governance review. Secondly, to note the results of the governance assessment. And thirdly, to approve the annual governance statement for inclusion with the annual accounts. Would anybody like to move that? Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Mike. All those in favour? Unanimous. Thanks. Any other businesses of urgency? I don't think there is any, is there? No, good. Thank you all very much.